It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And on today's show, we are going to talk about Jon Jones. We are going to talk about the Contender Series possibly doubling up events. We're going to talk about TKO's sharp uptick in stock prices. We're going to talk about the MMAFA wanting to expand the Ali Expansion Act. But first, I'm going to need y'all to subscribe because you won't have access to all of that unless you do subscribe, because some of this will be behind a paywall. Now, John, how the heck are you?
Fairly good. So, yeah, I read fairly. Not excellent, not poor, but fairly good.
Fairly good. Why only fairly good?
Well, because I'm doing fairly well here, I guess. I don't know. I just didn't want to go rate it too high because it's not like I'm doing spectacular here right now, but again, I'm not doing poor. The weather's nice. I've got a long list of chores and things to get done that I've fallen behind on. So I've got some great things going, like I can go out and, enjoy the weather and go meet friends, but I'm also falling behind on all the shit I'm supposed to do. So I feel guilty about that. So that's why I put myself in the fairly okay category.
Fairly okay. All right. So it's not that anything terrible happened that brought down a really good day. It's just that it never really achieved good day status.
I still got to go to the grocery store. I gotta do wash, which I'm always late on. So there's just a long list of little things I got to get done, and I'd rather be doing other stuff.
Gotcha. All right. Well, here's some stuff that we got to do. We got to get into this. First topic. The MMAFA is calling on fighters, trainers, fans, and advocates like us to sign a petition for the Ali Expansion Act. Now, can you explain what this achieves and what the next steps are?
Well, what this achieves, I'm not sure what it achieves, to tell you the truth, per se, and not to disregard it, because as we know, Donald Trump's in the White House. Is it the chance? Do we really think it's going to pass right now? I don't think that's possible in the current Congress and the current White House. But I think that what they want to have is a show of support for expanding the Ali Act, especially in the upcoming ABC convention that happens in New Orleans in August. People might have noticed if they saw the schedule. Originally, there were 2 Ali Act events scheduled on the schedule. Those were removed, left blank. I was informed by Mike Mazzulli that they were just being moved around and they will take place. But we have this ABC event, and one of them I believe, is going to be hosted on behalf of TKO about the possibility of expanding the Ali Act. Not expanding, but reforming, as they say, amending it. And then the MMAFA also wanted to do a session on expanding the Ali Act to cover MMA. So I think what they want to do is they want to show of support that they can show to the ABC that there's a large support for people that want to see it expanded to MMA and do not want to see promoters like TKO being able to amend it to their benefit in boxing. And that way they can use it as to maybe get ABC not to be working with or not to support any sort of amendments that would be at the detriment of fighters. I think that's the plan. Now, what is the timeline? Again, I think they're going to submit this, bring it in August. For the ABC convention. I think that's their plan. If people want, they can go. There's look up the MMAFA Twitter account. There's a link there to the document. The document itself is a letter they want to expand the Ali Act to protect all fighters. And then it goes through the history, what it was done to protect, what was the intent of, what the purpose of expanding would be, and then they go through some of the legislative history of the Ali Act. Which, if you're a listener to the show, reader, you're probably familiar with this because this is stuff we brought up before, this legislative history. A lot of the quotes are stuff that I use myself in an article on this Substack. And then at the end, they give you a chance to sign and support. So if you're in support of expanding the Ali Act, or if you just want to support the show of strength that people support the Ollie Act and do not want to see it amended by promoters, probably be a good idea to maybe go over there, log on. I think I'll put the link in the Substack as well. So if you need to find it, and you could sign it as well and show your support.
All right. Now, we would be remiss if we didn't say something about what's going on in the Middle East, because it looks like it's going to have an effect on a TKO show in the immediate future. Currently, there have been some attacks happening on U.S. military bases in the Middle East. Do you think that the scheduled WWE event, I believe it's the Night of Champions, will be affected? Will it be moved, canceled? Considering that not U.S. airspace, the airspace over there has been closed down to commercial travel.
I imagine it will be impacted. I saw Dave Meltzer on X posting Twitter. Screw X. I know I'm not supposed to say X. Twitter. He had made a comment. I think that it might have been someone else. It might not have been Dave Meltzer, but I think it was Dave Meltzer, that some of the staff and production staff for the WWE was stranded, or some of them already had gone out there, and so they're already there, and flights have been canceled. Others may be stranded in Qatar or some others. I believe that there's a hub in Qatar that they had a linking flight, and so they might be stranded there. So it sounds like a mess. I do think it sounds like there's a good chance it'll be impacted. The Saudis have canceled they've suspended flights over the airspace, commercial flights, just to prevent any accidents with a war going on. Probably a smart idea. Give them credit for that. Qatar has done the same, the Gulf states, because they are, in an active war zone, basically. So again, good idea to ban commercial flights where someone could be at risk of something terrible happening to civilians. And I do not know how soon they'll lift that. Now, Donald Trump, as we record this, Donald Trump just announced they have a ceasefire. News reports are that the Iranians are saying they have not yet received the proposal for the ceasefire. So I do not know what the truth is. There's currently, as we're recording, there are air attacks being launched by Israel against Iran. I imagine there are missile attacks being launched from Iran towards Israel. We just had earlier in the day a missile attack on a U.S. base in the region, in the Gulf, in Qatar. So again, that's why they're nervous about air travel. Although at the same time, supposedly the Iranians let the Qataris know about it, who then let the Americans know about it. So the base was basically abandoned before it was hit. If that's true, that suggests that the Iranians are trying to bring down the hostilities, to basically try to find an off ramp to get off this, and the Americans. So maybe the proposal goes through, but right now we don't know. So I would say, you would think in this current situation that the TKO with the WWE would decide, you know what, we do not know what the future holds right now in the next few days, so we are going to cancel the event, move it to England. I think some people were suggesting. But at the same time, they probably are getting paid a lot by the Saudis. And we know one thing about TKO, they like money. And we also know they have a direct line to Trump. So maybe Trump's announcement was really them calling him saying, listen, we have an event on Saturday. We need to put an end to this.
Oh my goodness.
So you don't know with this administration. Now, I find that unlikely. What? Is it impossible? Maybe not. So I would think that they're going to cancel the event. I would think that they're going to move the event just to be safe. I would think that's all true. But at the same time, this is the same company that was just gung-ho to, no matter what, get out of the gate and start holding events in the middle of a pandemic when the entire country was shut down. When they need money, they need money. And right now, I hopefully they don't need the money as bad as they did in the past. And so hopefully they will make the best decision. But again, it's TKO. So, when there's money involved, they will make decisions to get more money.
Wow. All right. So we are going to switch gears here because we had some wild news break right after UFC Baku on Saturday evening. And that was Jon Jones's retirement was announced at the post-fight presser, and not by Jon Jones. Dana White announced it. What are your initial thoughts on his retirement? Like, I want your knee-jerk thought when you heard it.
A yawn was kind of my thought. It was not, everybody's like, oh, this is big news. And I'm like, is it? He's not fighting. He doesn't sound interested in fighting. The only shock to me is that he didn't hang on longer to get the most days as a reigning heavyweight champion, right? On one defense too. That's the part that's I find hilarious. These graphics, these sites will post up like, Jon Jones is now number 2 for the longest reign in days of a heavyweight champion on one title defense. It's like we should probably take that into consideration, shouldn't we? But apparently they don't. Anyway, my big reaction was I didn't really care. I mean, I will credit Jon Jones at the end of my days that he was a great fighter, one of the greatest of all time, arguably the best we've ever seen, the most dominant champion, the best light heavyweight champion probably ever, longest, all these accolades are correct. And I was bored endlessly with him at heavyweight. We were not getting the fights at heavyweight we wanted. And if we're not going to get them made, then I don't, he should retire. I listen, I hold no blame against Jon Jones. I never did that. He does not want to fight Tom Aspinall. Fighters should fight who they want. The problem is he should not be able to be called the heavyweight champion and not fill the obligation of a champion to defend it against the next challenger. He should have to forfeit the belt, which he finally did. Now, that was my only big gripe on that whole situation. But so again, I mean, it was kind of a who cares? He has already proven he's not really right now committed to fighting and defending against the top heavyweights. We didn't get Ngannou and we're not getting Aspinall. So, what was your reaction? I should ask.
I laughed because I had already seen the reports that came out immediately around this, and I'm going to ask you about that in a second. But my mind immediately went to the fact that I feel like it got announced by Dana White because Jon Jones got in trouble with the law again. And that's my next question to you. Do you think that his recent brush with the law had anything to do with it? I know what I think, but what do you think?
Well, my first gut reaction was no, because I wasn't aware of the legal complaint against him until a few minutes later after the announcement, and then it started, kind of coming together. I had a call today from someone, I'm not going to give their name, but someone in the industry, and he did not think for some reason he didn't think the complaint was real. He thought it was, I guess a lot of people in the industry just believe in conspiracy theories. And to me, I'm like, that doesn't make sense. The complaint supposedly happened in February. My guess what happened is Jon Jones got word that this complaint was going to go public, that it was going to reach the media, finally become the public was become aware, called up, said, I'm not fighting, because he did not want to be in the limelight why this complaint was happening. Plus, maybe he was trying to think of the UFC. I also don't want to put you in the spotlight as the champion. Why this is when this hits the media. And I think that's what happened. Mm-hmm. At the same time, though, he didn't seem too gung-ho about coming back to fight either way. But I do think, I think the announcement, I don't know if it played any part in the fact that he hasn't fought at all, or that he, that he's, or, now in hindsight, maybe it did. Maybe, this has been hanging over his head, and that's one of the reasons he's made no commitment to come back and fight. I don't know, but I definitely think the announcement to officially retire came out of that the fact that was going to break in the press.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what I thought.
Look at that, we think alike.
Considering the shambles that the heavyweight division is in, and it's been this way for a long time. Heavyweight has been sort of a weak division for many, many years. Do you think Tom Aspinall can build a legacy without Ngannou and Jon Jones?
It's going to be hard, but I think it's possible. In fact, I mean, it's possible too that I still think it's possible that Enanu could come back to the UFC. I think they're working with Turki Al-Sheikh, who supposedly has a good relation with Enanu. And so, and as much as Dana, everybody looks at him as like the authoritarian that runs the UFC. Even though Turki Al-Sheikh is not technically part of TKO, he kind of outranks Dana. They love his money a lot, the investors of TKO. So that would go a long way of helping Ngannou come back. There's a question of his contract with PFL, as we've discussed many times in the past. My understanding, based on what I heard, and I'm going to go over really briefly how I know this is, we got to remember Ngannou himself and his manager at the time, Markel Martin, said that one of their major problems was UFC contracts didn't have an end date, termination date. In interviews, they suggested and even said that they have that in they have everything they want in their contract, including those type of termination dates and endpoint, that the contract cannot continue forever. We know from the Harvard study that did on Ngannou, they talked about it's a 2-year contract. I believe it ends in March. That's a big hint right there that they have a copy of the contract. You can make that analysis. In fact, I'm pretty sure the person in Harvard had the contract because they have a lot of details in there. Ngannou negotiated with multiple people, so numerous people actually know about the details in the contract. And when we wrote and covered this, we've talked to many people that were part of those negotiations and heard what was being told about what other promotions are offering. And my understanding was that there was a termination date in the contract. And that's why I say I think his contract possibly could be up because of that termination date. But it could have been altered at some point by Ngannou for whatever reason to give him an extension to PFL. It could be that he likes his relationship with them because of the PFL Africa and his seat at the board on that. And he doesn't want to, he still wants to support PFL. So he stays in for that. There's multiple reasons. But I do think there's a possibility that the UFC could if they really wanted, get Ngannou back by either, exercising his termination clause or just going to PFL and say, we want to lease him from you. I doubt they would do that, but UFC could at least make that effort. And Enanu back in the UFC is the type of massive fight. If Jon Jones's legal problems are gone, maybe he thinks about coming back for just that because it's so much money. So where does that leave Tom Aspinall? Not needs these big fights. My advice to Tom, who's not listening, I'm sure, but maybe somebody is that you do not have the profile yet. You do not have the profile yet to get the big money fight with those guys. That to make it such a big fight that you can guarantee yourself the type of payday to make it worthwhile. So I would recommend in the next 6 months, 9 months, get 2 to 3 fights in, right? And now that sounds, kind of unfair and a lot. He is the heavyweight champion, but look at the competition that you're facing in the UFC right now. I would, if the talent is a step below you, tell them to move them to the front of the line and fight them right away. Because you could probably knock out, let's say, 2 good opponents. You knock out really in quick succession while UFC fans are paying attention. Guess what? Now you are the fight everybody wants to see. And then the money will be so high. Maybe Ngannou, they can bring him back to fight you. Maybe Jones will come back to fight you. Maybe Jones and Ngannou might still happen, but you are the person that they have to fight afterwards because there's so much interest, so much money potentially involved. And when the UFC moves to their next broadcast station, they're not going to magically change the model, but their revenue is going to increase so much that, hey, why not you guys, you heavyweights, both of you getting kind of that what Conor McGregor was getting paid to fight Khabib type money. We're talking $20 million each, which breaks the scale for the UFC, but they are still on a fight of that scale on their next deal will be raking it in. So they might be willing to, to open up the books for that kind of pay for that kind of fight. So Tom's big problem right now is he does not have an opponent that's going to put him in the elevate him to the level of the other guys that preceded him because he's an email champ, sadly to say. So I would think the thing he could do to correct that is get some big, impressive wins. Now, the problem with that is, of course, is that the pay that the UFC is going to give you is a fraction of what you could get in a big fight. And that would be a fraction of what the UFC currently would be probably willing to pay Jon Jones or Ngannou. And so you have to get in a position where you can demand equal what those guys get. In some ways, it might be better for them not to have that fight right now. because if he can get in a better position amongst the fan base and everything, he can probably demand a rate more comparable to what they're getting.
Alan Jouban suggested that perhaps his payment from the UFC settlement is what led him to retire. Remind everybody how much Jones stands to make from his claim.
Well, Jones, we know what people make from the claim, at least what they're supposed to make. We don't know the final amount, because it'll be adjusted based on how many didn't take their claim. My understanding is that 97% of all fighters, so you're talking like 35 fighters total, 35 fighters only did not file their claim. So almost every fighter filed their claim, it sounds like. And that means almost all the money was taken, so there'll be very little extra split with the fighters. But the formula is the fighters are going to get $250 million of that $375 million settlement. 70% of that goes to bout compensation, and that's calculated by you take the total number of money a fighter made. What percentage of that was of the total amount of bout compensation that was paid out by the UFC during the class period for December 16, 2010 to June 30, 2017. We know that was $556.5 million. So we can calculate what your bout compensation will be, which will come out to about 32% of your total earnings you made in your UFC career for bouts. That doesn't count merchandise, doesn't count sponsorship, but it just your pay-per-view, your base pay, your win bonus, your pay-per-view bonus, your side letters and letters of agreement that pay you extra that are not reported to athletic commissions, your just discretionary locker room bonuses, your fight of the night bonuses, all those things get totaled in. And 34% of it is what the fighters make, plus about $14,000 per fight additionally that they had during that period. So we also know, thanks to the class action lawsuit, we have a list of every purse amount that was paid by the UFC during the class period. Now, the fighters' names aren't attached, but it shows the year it was paid and the number of fights a fighter had. And so for someone like Jon Jones, it's pretty easy to figure out which purses are his, because you look at a fighter, that was on his 9th fight, I'm just making up a number, and got 1.8 million. And you're like, well, who could have got that? Then you could also, by asking around, we do know some of the purses that were disclosed through discovery in the lawsuit. We also, have talked to people and they've disclosed personally their purses. So you can mark off a few purses, and then you're left with, well, the only possible person that had 9 fights in that period who could make that kind of money is Jon Jones, right? Or some other star. We, like in 2016, one fighter on his 6th UFC fight made $8 million. Well, it's pretty easy to figure out who that is. That was Brock Lesnar at that time. And so that way we can go through and we can basically total up all the purses Jon Jones made. He made about $19.5 million during the class period. And so my calculation is, and add a small percentage from who didn't collect plus the escrow, interest on the escrow, he will get about $6.5 million from this class action settlement. Now, do we think that that's the reason why he's not, he's retiring? I'm not sure that's the prime motivation. He probably would make more fighting, but in some ways, I do think this could have an impact on why he's making a decision, why he hasn't been so quick to come back. Because, $6.5 million's not nothing. I mean, it's a big chunk of what he made from, 2010, 2017. The last, since then, he's made probably $40 million, I think I estimate, fighting, which is a lot more. But this is basically the amount of money he would make, almost as much as what he'd make fighting without having to pay his trainers, his management, any of that. He would get to keep this money without having to take the risk of brain damage or anything. So I'm sure that plays a part. And it's like on top of everything else he's done, this is just some extra money that'll go a long way. So I don't think it's like the prime motivation, like, oh, I have this big check coming, I don't need to fight. But I do think it's like, well, do I really want to fight? I don't have to worry as much because I do have some extra money coming. I think that might have played a part in it. So it's possible, but it's not the huge generational wealth that perhaps some fights can. Well, it's MMA. No one really makes huge generational wealth in MMA, but it's not that massive amount. It's not Tyson Fury money. Let's just put it that way, or the old Deontay Wilder money we used to always talk about.
How big a draw was Jon Jones at his peak, and how big a draw was he before Saturday?
he was fairly big. Now, it's funny, MMA, we have this thing where we always, almost like you're not a draw unless you sell like 1 million pay-per-views. Like everybody only compares fighters to the very top. Like they look at, did it do 1 million pay-per-view buys? And we should point out that a lot of those 1 million pay-per-view buys, when they're shown in the press, were not 1 million pay-per-view buys. We know through Discovery, they were lower than what was often reported by the media. But under that, that metric, like Conor McGregor is obviously a star, right? And then you go to like Brock Lesnar, crossed 1 million a couple times a star. But George St. Pierre, except for UFC 100, never crossed 1 million. He was definitely a star. In boxing, there's a lot of guys that generate 600 to 800,000 pay-per-views when they fight a lot of times. And that's a big star. That's a lot of money. And Jon Jones is similar. He was never a 1 million plus pay-per-view guy. But again, we've only seen a dozen plus pay-per-views that cross the 1 million mark. But he consistently sold several 100,000, 3, 4, 500,000, which is very adequate, is acceptable, actually good. It's very presentable to people that they sell that much. And when he had the right opponent, when he went against Daniel Cormier, when he went against, I don't know what his most recent ones did, but we know the two DC fights both sold like 800,000 pay-per-view buys. That's a lot of pay-per-views. That's a lot of money. Those events, and this was 10 years ago, I think we can calculate they did over 30 million in revenue, of which, for the UFC, that's great because you only have to pay Jon Jones about 10% of that. And you get to keep and Cormier 1/3 what Jon Jones gets, and you get to keep the rest. So that's a great thing for them. So he generated a lot of money. Now, he wasn't as big. His live gates weren't as big as some other guys. He definitely was down a few pegs from like the GSPs and even the Anderson Silva and Peter Belfords and Brock, and they did better live gate. But lately, even that is taken. UFC sells a lot of tickets lately, but even his ticket sales have been much higher than the UFC's, except for that Miocic fight. I think ended up being a disappointment because people remember when the first time it was announced and went on sale, they were targeting a 30 million plus gate for that event. And it looked like it might reach that. And there was a high demand. Now, delayed a year, we haven't seen Miocic for another year. He's old as hell now, and the demand kind of waned. It lost the mojo it had at that moment. But a big part of that was, people want to see Jon Jones defend the heavyweight title he just won against Gane. And so Jon Jones is not the biggest star. He's not as big as, Brock, not as big as Conor McGregor, not as big as Ronda at her peak, but that was very short, only a few fights for Ronda. Not as big as George St. Pierre, but he's right next to those guys. And I would say he's a big star. And especially now, the UFC is out of stars. They're lacking. We're in a very downward trend right now. We're in a death valley of stars right now. I mean, we have stars coming up, but what moves the audience is we are definitely in a bad spell here for the UFC on star power. He probably is the biggest remaining star they had right now. He had potentially big fights available to him if they could have gotten Ngannou back. Tom Aspinall, so there was Matt Poatan coming up, would have been big. So he had the potential to even be a bigger star, but it definitely takes away I would say he's the number one current attraction that's been fighting, even though he's only been fighting once a year lately, because Conor McGregor is not fighting at all. You take him away, that's it. That's the two biggest stars in the UFC.
Let's talk about Dustin Poirier because he is retiring. And with Jon Jones retiring, now I know Poirier isn't in that category that Jon Jones is in, and certainly not in the same category as Conor McGregor or Ronda Rousey. But you have spoken before about the Conor McGregor rub. With him retiring and Jon Jones retiring, who's left to help push pay-per-view sales and possibly those tentpole events that are rumored to be in the purview of Netflix? Who's left to do those? To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Oh! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!